The night my life changed, I was 43 minutes from home and singing along to a Christmas playlist I'd made myself. That detail always gets me. I remember thinking the drive was actually peaceful for once. No ice on the roads, light traffic, the kind of quiet December evening where the stars look close enough to touch. I was happy. I was genuinely stupidly happy because I had finally, after 3 years of excuses, decided to spend Christmas with my grandmother instead of my parents. I never made it. A pickup truck ran a red light on Route 9, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed with a tube in my arm and a stranger's face looking down at me asking if I knew what day it was. I didn't. I didn't know what day it was. I didn't know where exactly I was, and for one terrifying moment, I didn't remember the crash at all. Just the song. Just the song. Then nothing. The doctor, a kind woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, told me I had 2 fractured ribs, a lacerated spleen, and a concussion. I'd been unconscious for nearly 11 hours. The surgery had gone well. I was lucky to be alive. "Is there anyone we can call?" she asked. I gave her my mother's number. What happened next is something I've turned over in my mind so many times that I can recite it like a script. The nurse told me later, quietly like she was embarrassed to say it out loud, that when the hospital called my parents, my father's response was to ask whether they really needed to drive down that night. "She's stable," he'd apparently said. "She's not going anywhere." My mother got on the phone and asked if I was conscious. The nurse told her yes. "Then she's fine," my mother said. "We'll come down when we can." They did not come that night. They did not come that night morning. They came on the 3rd day, after I had already been told my surgery bill was going to be somewhere in the range of $40,000, after I had already cried alone in a hospital room on Christmas Eve, after I had already decided that I was done. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Claire, and I am 31 years old, and I have spent most of my life trying to understand what I did wrong. I was the first child, and from everything I can piece together now, I arrived at exactly the wrong time. My parents had been married less than a year. My father had just started a job he hated. My mother had given up a graduate program she loved. I don't know which one of them decided to blame me for all of that, but somewhere along the way, it became a family assumption that I was the difficult one, the demanding one, the one who always needed too much. My brother Daniel came along 4 years later, and he was different. He was easy. He laughed at my father's jokes. He didn't ask why. He learned early that the path to peace in our house was to agree with everything my father said, and he walked that path so smoothly it looked effortless. I couldn't do it. I asked too many questions. I pushed back on things that didn't make sense to me. My father called it attitude. My mother called it exhausting. My grandmother called it a gift. Her name was Ruth. She was my mother's mother, and she was the only person in my life who ever made me feel like I wasn't too much. She lived 40 minutes away in a small house with a garden full of tomatoes every summer, and when I was young, I spent as many weekends there as my parents would allow. She taught me to cook. She taught me to sew. She let me stay up late watching old movies and never once told me to be quieter or smaller or less. When I was 16, my father and my grandmother had an argument. I was never told exactly what it was about. I still don't know the full story, but the result was absolute. My father informed my mother that Ruth was no longer welcome in our home. No holidays, no drop-bys, no phone calls on the landline. My mother, as she always did, agreed. I was not consulted. I cried for a week. I begged my mother to explain. She told me that my father had his reasons and that I needed to respect that. When I tried to call my grandmother from my cell phone, my father took the phone. When I tried to write her a letter, he intercepted it. I was 16 years old and completely powerless, and the one person who had ever made me feel seen had been erased from my life as casually as a name crossed off a list. I didn't see my grandmother again for 6 years. When I turned 18 and left for college, I thought I would find her immediately. I thought the first thing I would do was drive to her house and knock on her door and throw my arms around her and tell her I had never stopped thinking about her. But here's what nobody tells you about being raised by people who make you feel worthless. You don't suddenly become whole the moment you're free. You carry it with you. I got to college and I was so overwhelmed by everything, by being around people who seemed to have normal, functional families, by trying to figure out who I was outside of that house, that I kept putting it off. One semester, then another. I told myself I'd call her when things settled down. I told myself there was time. I was also still dependent on my parents financially, at least partially, and I was terrified. My father had made it clear in the way he made everything clear. Not by saying it outright, but by making the alternative unthinkable, that reconnecting with Ruth would have consequences. I didn't know what those consequences were. I didn't want to find out. So I waited. And I waited. And I finished my degree in elementary education and got a job teaching 3rd grade in a district 2 hours from my hometown. And I told myself that now that I was completely on my own, now that I didn't need anything from them, I would go find her. That was the year my father told me the money I'd received for college, the money I had always believed was a combination of financial aid and a small fund my parents had saved, had actually been a loan. From them. With interest. I remember sitting at my kitchen table reading the email, reading it twice, reading it a 3rd time, certain I was missing something. He laid it out in a spreadsheet. 4 years of tuition and living expenses, plus 3% interest, totaling just under $38,000. He expected monthly payments starting the following January. I called my mother. She said yes, they had always considered it a loan and that she was sorry if that had never been clearly communicated, but that I surely understood they weren't in a position to just give that kind of money away. I paid it. God help me, I paid it for 2 years. I ate rice and beans 4 nights a week and skipped the dentist and didn't buy new clothes because I was paying off a debt I had never agreed to for an education I had worked for with money that, as I would later discover, had never belonged to my parents at all. But I didn't know that yet. The Christmas I crashed my car, I had finally made a decision. I had spent 3 weeks tracking down my grandmother's address through a combination of old letters I'd found in a box in my childhood bedroom and a county property records search that had taken me 4 evenings of squinting at my laptop screen. I found her. Same house. Same street. Still there. I had written her a letter in November. I told her I was sorry it had taken me so long. I told her I thought about her all the time. I told her I was coming for Christmas if she'd have me. She wrote back in 8 days. The handwriting was shakier than I remembered. The letter was 2 pages long and ended with, "Don't you dare cancel on me, Claire. I'll have the guest room ready." I was so happy driving to her house that night. I had her address on a sticky note on my dashboard. I had a tin of those butter cookies she used to love in a bag on the passenger seat. I had the radio on, and then the pickup truck came through the red light, and everything went quiet. I woke up in the hospital on Christmas morning and I was alone. A nurse named Deborah sat with me for a little while when she could. She was the one who eventually told me, gently, what my parents had said on the phone. She didn't have to tell me. I think she told me because she could see that I was waiting, that every time the door opened I was looking up, hoping, and she thought it was kinder to let me stop waiting. I didn't cry right away. I just nodded and looked at the ceiling and felt something settle into place the way a bone does when it finally breaks all the way through. My parents arrived on the 27th. My father walked in, looked around the room and said, "These hospital TVs are terrible, aren't they?" That was the first thing he said to me after I had emergency surgery on Christmas Eve. My mother hugged me. It was brief and smelled like her perfume, and she asked how I was feeling and whether the doctors had said when I could leave. My father sat in the chair by the window and looked at his phone. He asked once whether the other driver had been cited. When I said yes, he nodded like that settled something. They stayed for 90 minutes. My father said they had dinner plans. They couldn't cancel. He said it the way people say things they know are absurd, but have decided to say anyway because the alternative would require them to feel something. After they left, I lay there in the quiet for a long time. The next morning, a hospital billing coordinator came to talk to me about my account. I was uninsured. I had just switched jobs at the start of December and my new coverage didn't kick in until January, something I had been mildly stressed about but hadn't considered urgent. The timing was, in retrospect, spectacularly bad. The coordinator was kind about it. She went through my options: a payment plan, a hardship application, a financial assistance program the hospital offered for qualifying patients. She said she wanted me to know before I was discharged so I wasn't blindsided. She also told me something that genuinely confused me. "The balance on your account has been partially paid," she said, looking at her screen. A payment of $22,000 was made this morning, cash equivalent, a certified check. I told her I didn't know what she was talking about. She looked at me carefully. "You didn't arrange this?" "No," I said. "Who paid it?" She checked her records. The payment had been made in person at the billing desk before 8 in the morning. No name on the check beyond a trust account number. But the person who had brought it, she had been there when it came in, was an older man. She described him: tall, heavy-set, white hair, wore a dark coat. She'd asked him his name. He said just to tell me that it was handled and that I should focus on getting better. I didn't understand it. I turned it over and over in my mind for the rest of that day, and I could not make it make sense. When I was discharged 2 days later, there was an envelope waiting for me at the front desk with my name on it. Inside was a single index card. The handwriting was shaky, familiar. It said, "I'm sorry I couldn't come up to the room. I didn't want to cause you any more trouble. I love you more than you know. Get well. Come see me when you're ready. Grandma Ruth. P.S. The cookies are at home waiting for you. I didn't eat them all, just some." I sat down on a bench in the hospital lobby and I sobbed. An orderly asked if I needed help and I shook my head and kept crying. I cried until I didn't have anything left, and then I blew my nose on a paper towel from the bathroom and called a cab because my car was totaled, and I went to my grandmother's house. She opened the door before I even knocked. She must have been watching from the window. She was smaller than I remembered, frailer. Her hair had gone completely white, and she moved carefully, the way people do when their body has started to require their attention. But her eyes were the same, sharp and warm and a little bit amused, like she found the world genuinely interesting and also slightly ridiculous. She pulled me into a hug that lasted a long time. Neither of us said anything. I think we were both too aware of how much time had passed to be able to summarize it. We sat at her kitchen table for most of that first evening. She made soup. She poured me tea even though I said I didn't want any, and then I drank all of it. She asked me about teaching, about my students, about where I lived, and whether I had friends, and whether I was taking care of myself. She didn't ask about my parents. I think she had decided a long time ago to simply let that part go. I asked her how she'd found out about the accident. "Daniel called me," she said. "That stopped me." "Daniel? He still calls me. He has for years. He doesn't tell your parents." She looked at her tea. "He's a more complicated person than he seems, I think." I didn't know what to do with that. I filed it away. "How did you get to the hospital?" I asked. "How did you don't drive anymore, do you?" "My neighbor Harold took me. He's 74 and drives like he's 25, so I spent most of the trip praying, but we got there." She smiled. "I couldn't come in the room. I wasn't sure what your parents had told you about me. I didn't want to make things harder." "They hadn't told me anything," I said. "They were barely there." She nodded slowly, like she wasn't surprised. "Grandma," I said. "The hospital bill don't," she said. "The hospital bill don't," she said. "I need to, Claire." She set down her tea. "Let me do this. I have savings and I have no one to spend them on. You are the only grandchild I care to claim. Let me do this one thing." I wanted to argue. I didn't have the energy, and honestly, I didn't have the heart to take it away from her. So I let her. I stayed for 2 weeks. I slept in the guest room she'd had ready for me since November, in a bed with a quilt she'd made herself 15 years ago. I helped her with grocery runs and doctor's appointments. I learned that she had a heart condition she'd been managing for 3 years, that she had a cardiologist she saw monthly, that she was stable but careful. She never once made me feel guilty for the years I'd missed. That was the thing about Ruth. She met you where you were. She didn't make you pay for the gap. Before I drove back home in a rental car, since mine was a total loss, I sat with her at the kitchen table one more time. "There's something I want to tell you," she said. Something I should have found a way to tell you sooner. She got up and came back with a folder. Inside were documents, bank statements, a letter from an attorney, records going back years. She had been sending money to my parents since I turned 18, monthly payments meant for my education. She had set aside a fund for me when I was born, nothing enormous but meaningful, and when I went to college, she had arranged with my mother to have it transferred in installments to help cover my costs. The understanding, my grandmother said, had been crystal clear. The money was for me, a gift, not a loan. I looked at the total. Over the 4-year span of my college education, she had given my parents just over $37,000. For me, I thought about my father's spreadsheet, the interest, the monthly payments I had been making for 2 years. I didn't say anything for a long time. I didn't know he told you it was a loan, she said. Her voice was quiet. I found out last year from your brother. I was so angry I couldn't sleep for a week. I want to help you do something about it, if you want to. I looked at her. What kind of something? I have an attorney, she said. A good one. She says you have a strong case. The documentation is clear, my bank records, the original agreement, everything. I told her I needed to think about it. I drove home, back to my apartment and my classroom and my life, and I thought about it for 3 weeks. Then I called my parents. My father answered. I told him I knew where the money had come from. I told him I had copies of every bank transfer my grandmother had made. I told him that I would be pursuing legal action to recover what I had repaid over the past 2 years unless he agreed to return it voluntarily. The silence on his end was very long. He tried a few things. He said I was misremembering. He said the money had been commingled, complicated, that I didn't understand how these things worked. He said my grandmother was old and her memory wasn't reliable. When none of that worked, he said I was being ungrateful. I said I'll have my attorney contact yours, and I hung up. I'm not going to pretend the months that followed were easy. There's something uniquely painful about deciding to fight your own parents in court, even when they deserve it, even when you know you're right. My mother called me 3 times to tell me I was tearing the family apart. My father sent a long email that used the word disappointing 6 times. Daniel texted me a single message, "You're doing the right thing." I'm sorry I took so long to say that. The case settled out of court. My parents returned the money I had repaid plus the attorney's fees. It wasn't a dramatic courtroom moment. It was paperwork and waiting and a very anticlimactic phone call from my lawyer telling me a check was in the mail, but it was mine, and it felt like something. I went back to see my grandmother every month after that. I rearranged my weekends around the drive. I brought groceries and stayed for dinner and sat with her in her garden in the spring while she bossed me around about which plants needed water. She was happy, I think, or as close to it as someone gets when they've made their peace with things. She died in September. It wasn't unexpected. Her cardiologist had told us in August that her heart was getting tired, and she had decided very calmly and very much like herself that she did not want aggressive intervention. She died in her house in her own bed with me there. I was holding her hand. I keep trying to find the words for what that was. Being there, being the one who stayed, and I can't quite get there. I was devastated. I am still devastated some mornings, but I was also grateful in a way that's hard to explain, grateful that I didn't miss it, that I had those 9 months, that I got to know her again as an adult, that she knew I came back. Her will left me the house. I had not expected it. I sat in the attorney's office and heard the words and had to ask him to repeat them because I was certain I'd misunderstood. But I hadn't. The house, the remaining savings, a collection of handwritten recipes in a binder I would have taken for free. My mother called when she found out. She was upset. There was an expectation, apparently, that the house would be sold and the proceeds split among the family. I listened to her for a while. She used the word fair several times. I said, she wanted me to have it. That was her decision to make. There was a long pause. Then my mother said, "Your father's blood pressure has been very high lately. The doctors are concerned. It would mean a lot to him if you called." I recognized this. I had recognized it my whole life. the pivot, the way any conversation could be redirected toward what they needed from me. "I hope he feels better," I said. "Take care of yourself." I moved into my grandmother's house the following spring. I put in a transfer request at work and got a position at a school in the district nearby. The commute is 12 minutes. The garden is growing tomatoes again. I kept almost everything the way she had it. The quilt is still on the guest bed. Her coffee mug is in the cabinet. I can't bring myself to use it, but I can't bring myself to pack it away either. Some mornings I sit at her kitchen table with my own coffee, and the light comes in through the window the way it always did, yellow and unhurried, and I talk to her a little. Just quietly, just to keep the habit. I found something in the house last fall, when I was finally going through the last of the boxes in the spare closet. It was a shoebox, and inside was every letter I had ever sent her, or tried to send her. The ones from when I was 16, the ones my father had intercepted. She had them all. He'd mailed them eventually, apparently, sometime after I left for college, without telling me, without explaining. A small grace I had not known about. Underneath the letters was a photograph. She and I on her porch, the summer I was 12. I'm laughing at something. She's looking at me with an expression I now know how to name. She was proud of me. I keep it on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, where the light hits it in the afternoon. I think about what I would tell my younger self if I could, the girl who waited, who was too scared, who kept saying there would be time. I'd tell her that the people who love you the way you deserve to be loved are rare and temporary and worth every inconvenient mile between you and them. I tell her not to wait until the logistics are perfect, or the fear is gone, or the timing feels right, because it never does. I tell her to get in the car. I tell her to drive. I used to believe that the people who were supposed to love you most would eventually come around, that if you were patient enough, quiet enough, good enough, something in them would soften. I spent years operating on that assumption. I kept my voice down. I paid the money. I showed up to holidays I dreaded because I kept thinking, this time, maybe this time. It took a car crash on Christmas Eve and waking up alone in a hospital room to finally understand that waiting for people to become who you need them to be is not patience. It's just a slower way of losing yourself. What I know now is that actions accumulate, not in some abstract cosmic sense, just in the plain human way that choices build on choices until they become a life. My father chose over and over to prioritize control over connection. My mother chose over and over to protect the peace of the house instead of the people in it. Those weren't single decisions, they were habits. And habits, practiced long enough, become character. By the time I was lying in that hospital bed, their character had been fully formed for a long time. I just hadn't been willing to see it clearly. Ruth made different choices. She kept every letter. She answered mine in 8 days. She got in a car with a 74-year-old neighbor and rode to the hospital at 70-something years old with a heart condition because I was there and she loved me. She didn't announce it. She didn't make me feel guilty for the years between us. She just showed up quietly, the way she always had. That's the thing about integrity. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It's just consistently choosing the harder, kinder thing when no one's watching. Ruth had it her whole life, and I didn't fully appreciate what I was watching until I was old enough to compare it to its absence. I think about what it cost me to stay afraid for so long. The years I kept my distance, telling myself I'd reach out when things settled down. The money I paid back on a debt that was never real, the holidays I spent performing normalcy in a house where I felt like a stranger, all of that came from one thing I had learned, early and thoroughly, to distrust my own judgment. When the people who are supposed to form your sense of self tell you repeatedly that your instincts are wrong, you start to believe them. Unlearning that takes longer than it should. What rebuilt me wasn't revenge, though I'll admit the settlement check felt like something. What rebuilt me was smaller than that. It was 9 months of Saturday drives. It was soup at a kitchen table. It was learning that the person I had been most afraid to lose, the one who had seen me clearly from the beginning, had never actually let me go. Daniel surprised me too. That quiet, cautious brother I thought had chosen the easier road had been making his own small acts of courage for years in the only way he knew how. People are more complicated than the roles we assign them. I'm still learning that. If I could say one thing to anyone who recognizes something of themselves in the story, it would be this. The clarity you're waiting for is not coming from them. It's not going to arrive in a conversation where they finally admit what they did or apologize in the way you deserve. That moment, for most people, never comes. The clarity comes from you, when you get tired enough of shrinking, when the cost of staying small finally outweighs the fear of being seen. I got in the car that December because I was finally ready. I almost didn't make it, but I did, and the person waiting at the end of that drive had cookies on the counter and the guest room made up, and 9 months left to give me everything I should have had all along. That was enough. It was more than enough. And I will spend the rest of my life being grateful I didn't wait one more year to go.